My life, up until that Tuesday, had been a study in quiet contentment. I lived in a modest but cozy bungalow in a suburb of Portland, a home filled with the scent of my mother's baking and the comfortable clutter of my father's books. At 30 years old, I had a job I enjoyed as a graphic designer, a close circle of friends, and parents who were my anchors, my confidants, and my greatest cheerleaders. My world was small, perhaps, by the standards of others, but it was a world built on a foundation of unshakable love and honesty. The fact that I was adopted was never a secret or a source of pain. It was simply a part of my story, a story my parents, David and Mary, had always told me with warmth and pride. They were the only family I had ever known, and the only one I had ever needed. I was happy. And then, the letter arrived. It wasn't a normal letter. It was delivered by a courier, enclosed in a thick, cream-colored envelope that felt heavy with an importance I couldn't yet comprehend. The return address wasn't a name, but a logo, an embossed V intertwined with a lion, belonging to a prestigious law firm in New York City. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. The language inside was cold, formal, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was a legal notification, stating that my biological mother, a woman named Eleanor Vance, had successfully located me after a comprehensive, multi-year search and formally requested to establish contact. The letter instructed me to have my legal representative contact their office to arrange a preliminary meeting. It read less like a heartfelt plea for reunion and more like a corporate summons, a hostile takeover of my quiet, unassuming life. A whirlwind of emotions swirled within me: shock, a deep, primal confusion, and a tiny, flickering ember of curiosity I thought I had extinguished years ago. I had never felt the stereotypical adoptee's yearning to find my roots. My roots were here, in this house, with the parents who had raised me. This letter felt like a disruption from an alien world, a ghost from a past that had never belonged to me. Why now, after 30 years of complete and utter silence? The timing felt strange, almost calculated. I folded the letter, the crisp paper feeling cold against my skin, and walked into the living room where my parents were reading. I didn't have to say a word. The look on my face told them that the quiet contentment of our lives had just been shattered. I handed the letter to my father, and as he read it, I saw his expression shift from confusion to a familiar, sharp-eyed wariness. My mother, Mary, read the letter over his shoulder, her gentle hand immediately finding mine. "Oh, honey," she whispered, her eyes soft with concern. "Whatever you want to do, we're right here with you." Her support was unconditional, a warm blanket against the sudden chill that had entered the room. But my father, David, was different. I watched as his expression hardened, the loving dad momentarily receding, replaced by the shrewd, analytical gaze of the man he used to be, a private investigator. He read the letter a second time, not as a father, but as a professional deconstructing a piece of evidence. He tapped a finger on the embossed logo, his brow furrowed in concentration. The silence in the room stretched, thick with unspoken questions. I knew that look. It was the look he got when a case didn't add up, when the story someone was selling didn't match the facts. And in his eyes, I saw the first shadow of a doubt that this was about anything other than a long-lost mother wanting to find her daughter. My father's background as a private investigator had given him a finely tuned skepticism, an almost supernatural ability to sense the hidden motives behind people's actions. He placed the letter on the coffee table, his gaze still fixed on it, as if it were a venomous snake. "Chloe," he said, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of steel, "we need to be very careful here." He began to deconstruct the situation with the methodical precision of his old profession. 30 years of silence. Not a single card, not a phone call, nothing. Now, out of the blue, a formal contact through a top-tier corporate law firm. This isn't a mother trying to reconnect with her child. This is a corporation executing a strategic maneuver. He pointed out every red flag, the impersonal language, the immediate involvement of lawyers, the sheer, calculated coldness of the approach. He smelled a motive, one that had nothing to do with a heartfelt reunion and everything to do with something they wanted from me. He stood up and began to pace, the old PI instincts taking over completely. Before you even think about replying to this, we do our own work, he stated, his voice leaving no room for argument. We do a full background check on this Eleanor Vance and her entire family. We find out who they are, what they do, and most importantly, what has changed in their lives recently that would make them suddenly so desperate to find you. He framed it as a standard precaution, a simple matter of due diligence. In my line of work, Chloe, you learn a hard lesson. People, especially very wealthy people, rarely do anything that doesn't benefit them directly. We need to find out what that benefit is before you walk into that room. We go in with our eyes open, or we don't go in at all. His words weren't meant to scare me, but to arm me. He was giving me the gift of his experience, the shield of his professional paranoia. I trusted my father's wisdom implicitly. His instincts had never been wrong. I agreed without hesitation, a sense of relief washing over me. I wasn't in this alone. I had my family, my real family, by my side. His cautious, analytical approach was the perfect antidote to the emotional chaos the letter had stirred within me. It grounded me, shifting my perspective from one of a confused, long-lost daughter to that of a cautious, intelligent woman about to engage in a high-stakes negotiation. This decision, to investigate before engaging, was the single most important one I would make. It set the stage for everything that was to come. We were no longer reacting to their move, we were preparing our own. The Vances had intended to find a naive, emotionally vulnerable young woman, an easy target for their manipulations. Thanks to my father, that is not who they were going to find. My childhood was a tapestry woven with threads of unconditional love, safety, and a profound sense of belonging. David and Mary had been open about my adoption from the moment I was old enough to understand, but they never framed it as a story of loss or abandonment. It was, in their telling, a story of being chosen. We didn't get to have a baby in the usual way, my mother would tell me, her voice soft as she tucked me in at night, so we made a wish to the universe for the perfect daughter, and the universe sent us you. This narrative shaped my entire identity. I never felt like a replacement or a second choice. I felt wanted. I felt special. My adoption wasn't a footnote in my life, it was the headline, the beautiful, defining miracle that had created our family. That sense of being deeply, unconditionally wanted was the greatest gift they ever gave me. This foundation of love and security meant I never experienced the void that so many stories about adoptees focus on. I had no identity crisis, no burning need to search for the truth of my origins. My truth was here, in the home filled with laughter, in the patient way my father taught me how to change a tire, in the comforting warmth of my mother's arms when I had a nightmare. These were the moments that had built me, the real, tangible experiences that had shaped who I was. The Vances, with their vast fortune and their cold, empty mansion, couldn't offer me anything I didn't already have. They couldn't tempt me with the promise of a real family, because I already had one. This emotional independence, this lack of need for their approval or love, was an armor they would never see coming. My father's love was my shield, and my mother's love was my sanctuary. This deep-seated happiness was crucial, a fortress of emotional stability that the Vances, with all their wealth and power, could not breach. They were expecting to find a young woman with a hole in her heart, a hole they could fill with money and the illusion of belonging. They assumed I would be grateful, awestruck, and, most importantly, easily manipulated. They couldn't have been more wrong. I wasn't looking for a mother, I had the best one in the world. I wasn't searching for a family, I was already the cherished center of one. I was walking into their world not as a supplicant, but as an equal, a woman who knew her own worth, a worth that had been instilled in me not by a bloodline, but by a lifetime of genuine, unwavering love. This inner strength, forged in a crucible of a happy childhood, would become my greatest weapon. The Vances operated in a world of transactions, where love was a currency and loyalty was conditional. They wouldn't know how to deal with someone who wasn't motivated by greed or a need for validation. I was an anomaly in their calculated world, an unforeseen variable that would throw their entire manipulative equation into chaos. I was not the vulnerable, long-lost girl of their fantasies. I was David and Mary's daughter, and I was walking into that meeting not to find a family, but to uncover the truth, armed with the unshakable confidence that can only come from knowing, without a shadow of a doubt, that you are already and completely loved. David slipped back into his old PI persona with an ease that was both comforting and a little unsettling. Our quiet, suburban home was transformed into an intelligence-gathering hub. The click of his keyboard late into the night became a familiar sound, a steady rhythm in the new, uncertain landscape of our lives. He made quiet phone calls to old contacts, his voice low and professional, speaking a language of inquiry and quiet favors I had only ever seen in movies. It was like watching a sleeping lion awaken, his instincts sharp, his focus absolute. He was no longer just my dad, he was the seasoned investigator, the man who knew how to find the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. He was protecting his family, and it was a role he had perfected long before I came into his life. He was determined to arm me with knowledge, to ensure I walked into that lion's den not as prey, but as a hunter myself. The first pieces of information began to surface within days. David's research confirmed that the Vances were not just wealthy, they were a dynasty. Vance Industries was a sprawling, multi-billion-dollar corporation with interests in shipping, real estate, and technology. They were old money, powerful and intensely private, a family known in elite circles for their ruthless business tactics and their almost paranoid obsession with their public image. A search through society archives revealed a carefully curated history, with no mention of any children given up for adoption. It was a perfect, pristine family tree, with no broken or missing branches. The lie was not a recent invention, it was a decades-old, foundational piece of their public identity. They had erased me from their history so completely that, according to the world, I had never existed. The most critical piece of the puzzle, the one that confirmed all of my father's suspicions, was the timing. A search of recent financial news and obituaries yielded the trigger. Theodore Vance, the patriarch of the family and the founder of Vance Industries, had passed away just 2 months prior. The timeline was too perfect to be a coincidence. For 30 years, there was silence. Then, within weeks of the old man's death, a high-powered law firm was suddenly on a mission to find me. David printed out the obituary and slid it across the table to me. "It was never about you, Chloe," he said, his voice grim. "It was always about him. His death is the reason they're looking for you. This is about his will. It has to be." The revelation landed with a cold, heavy thud in my gut. This wasn't a story of reunion. It was a story of inheritance. This knowledge was a game-changer. It transformed my entire perspective on the upcoming meeting. I was no longer an adoptee about to meet her biological mother, I was a potential heir about to walk into a nest of vipers. The emotional stakes of a family reunion were replaced by the cold, hard stakes of a financial negotiation. The Vances didn't want a daughter, they wanted a signature. They needed something from me, something stipulated in their father's will, and they were willing to orchestrate this elaborate, emotional charade to get it. My father's investigation had given me an invaluable advantage. I knew the real reason for the meeting, while they assumed I was completely in the dark. I would be walking into that room armed with the truth, a secret they had no idea I possessed. I agreed to the meeting, the date set for the following week at the Vance family estate. The days leading up to it were filled with a tense sort of preparation. David and I went over everything we knew, role-playing different scenarios, preparing me for their likely tactics of emotional manipulation and veiled pressure. He taught me to listen not just to what they said, but to what they didn't say, to watch their body language, to look for the cracks in their performance. By the time the day arrived, I was no longer nervous or emotionally conflicted. I was calm, focused, and prepared. I was not Chloe, the long-lost daughter, searching for answers. I was Chloe, David's daughter, an investigator's daughter, and I was walking into that meeting not to find a family, but to uncover a conspiracy. The game was on, and I knew the rules far better than they suspected. The drive to the Vance estate felt like a journey to another planet. We left our modest, tree-lined suburban street and drove towards the hills, where the houses grew larger and the gates grew taller. The estate itself was less a home and more a fortress, a sprawling, opulent mansion hidden behind a 10-foot wall and an imposing set of wrought iron gates. As we drove up the long, winding driveway, past perfectly manicured gardens and ornate fountains, I felt a profound sense of alienation. This world of excessive, almost obscene, wealth was so far removed from my own reality. It was a world built to impress, to intimidate, to keep outsiders at a distance. It was beautiful, but it was also cold, sterile, and utterly devoid of the warmth that I called home. This was not a place of family, it was a place of power. I was met at the door by a butler and led into a cavernous, marble-floored drawing room that looked more like a museum gallery than a living space. And there they were. Eleanor Vance, my biological mother, was the epitome of cold, old-money elegance, her smile a perfect, practiced curve that never reached her icy blue eyes. My half-siblings, Marcus and Isabella, stood beside her, looking me over with the cool, dismissive appraisal of two people assessing a business asset. They were polished, beautiful, and radiated an aura of effortless, inherited arrogance. The whole scene was a perfectly staged performance, a tableau of a welcoming family designed to overwhelm and disarm me. They moved and spoke with a rehearsed grace, their every word a carefully chosen part of the script they had prepared for me. The meeting began with a flood of insincere platitudes. "We've thought about you every day for 30 years, Eleanor said, her voice a smooth, cultured purr. "It was the hardest decision of my life, but I always knew you were destined for great things." Marcus and Isabella chimed in with their own rehearsed lines about how thrilled they were to finally meet their long-lost sister, and how they couldn't wait to make up for lost time. They showered me with compliments about my appearance, my career, my life, all based on the superficial details their lawyers had clearly dug up on me. It was a suffocating, disingenuous performance, and I could feel the cold, transactional energy humming just beneath the surface of their warm words. They weren't connecting with me, they were gathering data, probing for weaknesses, assessing my character for the next stage of their plan. I played my part, feigning a shy, overwhelmed gratitude. I remembered my father's advice: let them think they're in control. Let them believe their performance is working. I answered their questions with a soft-spoken politeness, revealing nothing of substance about my real life or my feelings. I was a blank canvas onto which they could project all their assumptions. They saw a quiet, simple girl from the suburbs, someone who would be easily dazzled by their wealth and easily manipulated by their performance of affection. I could see the smug satisfaction in their eyes as the meeting progressed. They thought they had me figured out. The meeting ended with the invitation I knew was coming. "There are some family matters we need to discuss," Eleanor said, her tone shifting slightly, becoming more businesslike. "To do with my father's estate. It's all a bit complicated, but it's wonderful news for all of us." She suggested we meet with the family lawyers the following week to go over the details. The hook had been baited. The trap was set. And I had just willingly, and knowingly, agreed to walk right into it. The Vances didn't wait long to make their next move. 2 days after our initial meeting, I received a call from their family lawyer, a man with a voice as smooth and cold as polished marble. He invited me to a preliminary family estate discussion at his downtown office. David insisted on coming with me, not as my father, but under the guise of my family financial advisor, a role he slipped into with a disquieting ease. The law office was a cathedral of wealth and power, all dark wood, supple leather, and hushed, intimidating silence. Eleanor, Marcus, and Isabella were already there, arranged around a massive conference table, looking for all the world like a royal family council. Their lawyer, Mr. Sterling, began by explaining the situation in the most condescendingly simple terms possible, as if speaking to a child. He confirmed that their patriarch, my biological grandfather Theodore Vance, had passed away, leaving behind a significant estate. He then revealed the hook. Theodore, he explained, had established a $10 million trust fund to be divided equally among his surviving grandchildren. As a newly discovered heir, I was entitled to a share. Marcus and Isabella exchanged small, self-satisfied smiles, as if they were bestowing upon me a great and magnanimous gift. Sterling explained that, due to the complexities of my late discovery, the easiest way to expedite the distribution of funds to everyone was for me to sign a simple document. He slid a thick, intimidating sheaf of papers across the table. He explained it was a legal formality, a way for me to acknowledge my status as an heir so that my siblings could receive their inheritance without a lengthy court delay. They were framing my signature not as a personal gain, but as an act of generosity towards the family that had just found me. It was a classic confidence game, appealing to a sense of belonging and familial duty they had done nothing to earn. To sweeten the deal, Eleanor made her move. "Of course, darling," she said, her voice dripping with artificial warmth, "we know this is all a lot to take in. To show our goodwill, and to help you get settled, we would like to offer you a small advance on your share immediately upon signing." Mr. Sterling mentioned a figure, $50,000, a sum that was life-changing for me, but, as I now knew, was a pittance compared to the $2.5 million that was my actual share. It was a test. They were dangling a shiny lure, expecting the poor, simple girl from the suburbs to bite, to be so dazzled by the sudden windfall that she wouldn't bother to read the fine print. They were counting on my presumed naivety, on my desire to be accepted by this powerful, wealthy family. They saw me as a problem to be managed, a small complication that could be bought off cheaply and quickly. Remembering my father's advice, I played my part beautifully. I put on a performance of wide-eyed, grateful disbelief. $50,000. I stammered, making sure my voice held just the right amount of awe. I don't know what to say. This is all so much, so fast. I looked at the complex legal document, then back at their expectant faces. "I would love to agree," I said, "but this is the most important decision of my life." My advisor, I gestured to my father, who gave a curt, professional nod, insists I take at least a day to review the paperwork. The smiles on their faces tightened ever so slightly. My request was reasonable, impossible to refuse without revealing their impatience. "Of course, dear," Eleanor said, though her eyes had lost their warmth. "Take all the time you need." We left that office with the documents in hand, the cold, calculated pressure of their trap a tangible weight in the air. They thought they had me hooked. They had no idea I was the one setting the trap. While I was busy playing the part of the overwhelmed heir, my father was back in his element, digging deep into the life and death of Theodore Vance. He wasn't just looking for financial information anymore, he was looking for a human connection, someone who was loyal to the old man, not to the vipers who bore his name. His research kept leading him back to one consistent fact: in his final years, Theodore had become increasingly reclusive. He had cut off most of his old society friends and had even resigned from the board of his own company, leaving his son, Eleanor's husband, in charge. He had become a ghost in his own mansion, a recluse who trusted no one. No one, that is, except for a single, constant presence in his life, a private, live-in nurse named Agnes Holloway. She had been with him for the last 5 years of his life, his sole companion and gatekeeper. Finding Agnes was the next critical step, but it proved to be a challenge. After Theodore's death, she had seemingly vanished. She wasn't listed at her previous address, and there was no forwarding information. It was as if she had been paid a handsome sum to disappear and keep her mouth shut. This, to my father, was just another red flag. He spent a week working his old magic, calling in favors from retired colleagues, sifting through nursing registries, and cross-referencing pension disbursement records. It was a slow, painstaking process, a search for a ghost in a system designed to protect privacy. He was looking for a needle in a nationwide haystack. But my father was nothing if not relentless. He had the patience of a predator, and he was convinced that this nurse was the key, the one person who knew the truth of Theodore's final wishes. He finally got a hit. An old friend in the Social Security Administration owed him a favor and did a discreet search. Agnes Holloway was alive and well, living in a quiet retirement community in Sedona, Arizona. She had retired immediately after Theodore's death and moved out of state, wanting a peaceful life away from the orbit of the Vance family. David knew he had to approach this carefully. A direct confrontation could scare her off. He made the call himself, his voice calm and reassuring. He introduced himself not as a PI, but as the father of Theodore Vance's long-lost granddaughter. He explained the situation, that we were trying to understand Theodore's true intentions, and that we believed the family was not being truthful with us. Agnes was wary at first, her voice guarded and professional. She was fiercely protective of her former patient's privacy. Mr. Vance was a very private man, she said, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. But then, my father took a gamble. We know he was trying to find her, David said. We know he regretted what happened. We just want to honor his memory. A long silence followed on the other end of the line. Then, Agnes's voice changed, the professional wall crumbling, replaced by a soft, weary warmth. He told me you might call one day, she whispered. He told me that if his real granddaughter ever found her way back, I was to give her something. It was the breakthrough, the moment the tide of our secret war began to turn. He left a message for her, Agnes continued. A final message. And he made me promise I would only give it to her. The flight to Arizona was filled with a nervous, electric anticipation. We were about to meet the one person who held the key to my grandfather's true legacy. Agnes Holloway lived in a small, tidy bungalow filled with books and plants. She was an elderly woman in her late 70s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that held a quiet strength and an unwavering loyalty. She greeted us not with suspicion, but with a look of profound relief, as if she had been waiting for this day for a very long time. She led us to her small living room and we sat, the three of us, as she began to speak. She told us about Theodore's final years, painting a portrait of a man imprisoned by his own wealth and consumed by a single, lifelong regret. She described his deep and abiding contempt for his family's insatiable greed, how he watched them circle his fortune like vultures waiting for him to die. Agnes spoke of how Theodore had spent years and a small fortune of his own private money trying to find me, a search his own children had actively sabotaged. He knew they were afraid that my appearance would complicate their inheritance, and he despised them for it. In his last months, when he knew his time was short, he became obsessed with leaving behind a message that they couldn't intercept or corrupt. He didn't trust the lawyers, he didn't trust his children, he didn't trust anyone but me, Agnes said, her voice thick with emotion. He knew they would try to cheat you, Chloe. He knew they would see you as a mark. So he decided to speak to you himself, in a way they could never control. It was his final act of defiance, a way to reach through time and death to protect the granddaughter he had never been allowed to know. Then, Agnes recounted the story of the video will. Theodore, weak but with a fire in his eyes, had her set up a small camera in his study. For an hour, he spoke directly to it, pouring out his heart, his regrets, his warnings, and his final, brilliant plan. He wanted to give me a weapon, a tool to not only claim what was rightfully mine but to expose his family for the greedy charlatans they were. It was his last will and testament, but it was also so much more. It was an apology, a warning, and a declaration of love. It was his way of finally being the grandfather to me that he had never had the chance to be in life. He had entrusted the recording to Agnes, his most loyal confidant, with a single, solemn instruction, to give it only to the granddaughter he had been forced to abandon. With a reverence that was deeply moving, Agnes walked over to a small, locked chest in the corner of the room. She opened it and retrieved a simple, unmarked USB drive. She held it in her palm for a moment before handing it to me. He made me promise to give this only to you, she said, her eyes welling with tears. He had a private nickname for your birth mother, from before she became one of them. He said I would know it was really you if you knew the name of the flower she was named after. My heart skipped a beat. My own mother, Mary, was an avid gardener, and my favorite flower had always been the white lily. It was a random, personal detail, a secret handshake between me and a man I had never met. The USB drive felt heavier than its small weight, a sacred object, a final message from beyond the grave that was about to change the course of my entire life. Back in the sterile anonymity of our hotel room, I plugged the USB drive into my laptop with trembling hands. A single video file appeared on the screen, labeled simply, "For Chloe." My father placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder as I clicked play. The face that filled the screen was that of an old man, frail and diminished by illness, but his eyes were a piercing blue, alive with an intelligence and a profound sadness that seemed to reach right through the screen and touch my soul. It was Theodore Vance, my grandfather. He looked directly into the camera, as if he could see me sitting there, 30 years in the future. "Hello, Chloe," he began, his voice a weak, raspy whisper, yet filled with a love that felt as real as if he were in the room with us. "If you are watching this, it means that I am gone, and that you have found your way back. I am so sorry. I am so sorry I wasn't strong enough to keep you." He spoke for what felt like an eternity, his confession a torrent of regret and self-recrimination. He told me the story of my birth, of the pressure from his wife and his ambitious daughter, Eleanor, to give me up for adoption. I was an inconvenience, a blemish on the perfect family image they wanted to project. He had been a coward, he said, a man who had built a corporate empire but had failed to protect his own granddaughter. A man's greatest regrets, he said, tears welling in his tired eyes, are not his failures in business, but his failures of courage. And my failure to fight for you is the greatest regret of my life. His apology was not an excuse, it was a raw, painful admission of his own weakness, and it was the most genuine thing I had ever heard about the family I came from. Then, his tone shifted. The sadness was replaced by a sharp, strategic fire. "But I will not let them fail you again," he said, his voice gaining a sudden strength. "So you must listen to me very carefully. Your mother and your siblings, they are vultures, my dear. They see you not as family, but as a key to a vault. They will try to charm you, manipulate you, and cheat you out of what is rightfully yours. Do not trust them. Do not believe a word they say. They are not welcoming you home, they are closing a business deal." His warning was explicit, a chilling confirmation of everything my father and I had suspected. He was arming me, preparing me for the battle that lay ahead, a battle he had foreseen and for which he had spent his final days forging my weapons. Watching the video was one of the most intensely emotional experiences of my life. I was meeting my grandfather for the first time, and he was speaking to me with a love and honesty that I had never imagined. It was a heartbreaking gift, a connection forged across the chasm of time and death. The video was his final act of love, his only way of being the grandfather he was never allowed to be. But it was also a call to action. He wasn't just apologizing for the past, he was entrusting me with the future. He was asking me to be the agent of his final justice, to be the one to finally hold his family accountable for their lifetime of greed. As the video continued, I felt my grief and confusion solidifying into a cold, clear resolve. I would not let him down. I would be the courageous heir he had deserved. The video continued, and my grandfather, with the mind of a brilliant corporate strategist, laid out the first part of the trap he had set. "Your family knows about one will, and one will only," he explained, a flicker of a cunning smile on his frail lips. "It's the one their lawyers will present to you. It stipulates that a $10 million trust fund is to be split equally among my 4 grandchildren. That includes you, my dear." He confirmed my father's theory down to the last detail. I was entitled to $2.5 million, a life-changing sum of money that he knew my biological family would never willingly part with. He was giving me the lay of the land, showing me the battlefield from a general's perspective, so I would know exactly what was at stake in the initial conflict. He then predicted their strategy with a chilling, almost psychic accuracy. "They will not tell you the true amount of your share," he warned, his voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "They will present you with a complex settlement agreement, and they will offer you a pittance to sign away your rights. $50,000, perhaps $100,000 if they think you're smart." It was the exact figure their lawyer had mentioned. My grandfather knew his family's greed so intimately that he could predict their every move, even from beyond the grave. He was playing a chess game with them, and he was 3 moves ahead. He was showing me their playbook, ensuring that I would recognize their deception for what it was, a cheap and insulting attempt to buy my silence and my signature. He explained their motive with a cold, queer logic. "They need your signature, Chloe," he said. "Without it, the terms of the trust require a lengthy and expensive legal process to have you declared legally lost or to contest your claim. It could tie up their inheritance for years. Your signature is their shortcut to a quick payday. They are not afraid of you, they are simply impatient." This was a crucial piece of insight. It meant that I had leverage. Time was on my side. Their desperation to get their hands on the money was their greatest weakness, a weakness my grandfather had fully intended for me to exploit. He wasn't just giving me information, he was giving me a strategy, a blueprint for how to turn their own greed and impatience against them. He leaned closer to the camera, his blue eyes holding a look of sad, grim satisfaction. "Let them believe they are winning, my dear," he said, his voice barely a whisper but filled with an iron will. "Let them think you are the naive, grateful little orphan they expect you to be. Agree to their terms. Accept their insulting offer. But insist on signing the papers at a formal reading, in front of their lawyers and the entire family." He paused, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. "Let them walk right into the trap I have set for them. Because what they don't know, my dear girl, is that their greed is about to be their undoing." The video paused, a cliffhanger from beyond the grave. He had laid out the bait. In the next part of his message, I knew he would reveal the steel jaws of the trap. The video on my laptop screen continued to play, my grandfather's face now grim with a strategic intensity. "Knowing my family as I do," he said, his voice a low, serious murmur, "I knew a simple inheritance would not be enough. They are masters of manipulation, and they would find a way to twist the truth, to paint you as the villain. So, I had my lawyers add a special provision to the main will, a little insurance policy of my own." He spoke of it with a chilling satisfaction, the final move of a grandmaster in a chess game against his own kin. He called it the integrity clause, but I would come to think of it as the poison pill, a self-destruct mechanism built into the very heart of their greed. He had anticipated their betrayal, and he had engineered a consequence so absolute, so devastating, that it would leave them with absolutely nothing. This was not just about protecting me, it was about delivering a final, posthumous judgment on their character. He then detailed the clause with the precision of a surgeon. The legal language was complex, but the meaning was simple and brutal. It stipulated that if any named beneficiary of the $10 million trust was found, by the independent executors of the estate, to have acted in a fraudulent, coercive, or deliberately deceptive manner towards another beneficiary, their own share of the trust would be immediately and irrevocably forfeited. The genius of the clause was in its construction. It was a silent, sleeping trap, waiting for a single act of bad faith to be triggered. By trying to cheat me out of my $2.5 million share, my so-called family wasn't just attempting a simple act of fraud, they were unknowingly holding a loaded gun to their own $7.5 million inheritance and pulling the trigger. My grandfather had turned their own greed into the weapon of their destruction. Furthermore, he had designed the clause to be inescapable. He explained that any forfeited shares would not be redistributed among the remaining siblings. Instead, they would be immediately absorbed into a pre-designated charitable trust he had secretly admired for years, a foundation that provided university scholarships for underprivileged students. This masterstroke removed any incentive for my half-siblings to turn on each other in a desperate attempt to claim a larger piece of the pie. If one of them got caught in the act of deception, they all went down together, and their money would go to strangers. It was a perfectly designed system of mutually assured destruction, all powered by their own avarice. The beauty of it was that they would be the ones to spring the trap on themselves. All I had to do was give them the opportunity, and their own nature would do the rest. As my father and I sat there, watching the video, the full, diabolical brilliance of my grandfather's plan washed over us. It was a strategy born of deep pain and a lifetime of disappointment in his own children. He hadn't just left me money, he had left me a perfectly crafted instrument of justice. The Van Cess thought they were playing a simple game of manipulation against a naive girl. They had no idea they were actually playing a high-stakes game of chicken against the ghost of their own father, a game he had rigged for them to lose from the very beginning. The $50,000 settlement they were offering me wasn't just an insult, it was the bait. And now, they were swimming towards it with an arrogant, predatory confidence, completely unaware of the steel jaws of the trap that were about to snap shut around them. Just when I thought the revelations were over, my grandfather's face on the screen softened. A faint, sad smile touched his lips for the first time. "Now, for the real truth, my dear Chloe," he said, his voice filled with a sudden warmth. "The $10 million, the arguments, the deception, the family drama you are about to witness, all of it is a distraction. It was a test, a piece of bait I threw into the water to see if the sharks would circle. I am sorry to put you through it, but it was the only way to prove to the world, and to the law, who they truly are." I exchanged a stunned look with my father. The $10 million that felt like a king's ransom was just a sideshow. A calculated piece of theater. What could possibly be bigger than that? The scale of his planning, the sheer, multi-layered complexity of his strategy, was almost beyond comprehension. He continued, leaning closer to the camera, sharing his greatest secret. "My real fortune, the one I built with my own 2 hands before I ever let my children's spouses into the company, is not in the Vance estate," he confessed. "Years ago, when I saw what my family was becoming, I established a second, completely private trust. It was set up offshore, managed by a small, fiercely loyal firm in Switzerland, and it is completely untouchable by my main estate's lawyers or any member of my family." He had created a financial fortress, a secret kingdom where he had quietly funneled the vast majority of his wealth for decades, a fortune his own children and grandchildren knew nothing about. He had built a lifeboat for his true legacy, ensuring it would survive the shipwreck he knew his family would eventually cause. Then he revealed the amount. "It contains," he said, pausing for a moment, as if to let the weight of his words sink in, "a little over $100 million in diversified investments, properties, and liquid assets." My father let out a low whistle, his professional investigator's composure momentarily breaking. $100 million. The number was so vast, so astronomical, that it didn't even feel real. It was a sum that could reshape the world. The $10 million trust the Van Cess were fighting over like a pack of wolves was, in comparison, nothing but table scraps. It was a decoy, a brilliant piece of misdirection designed to focus their greed while the real prize remained hidden, safe and sound, an ocean away. My grandfather hadn't just been a successful businessman, he had been a grandmaster of strategy, a visionary who saw the long game with a clarity his own children could never possess. He looked directly into the camera, his gaze so intense it felt as if he was in the room with us. His voice, thick with a lifetime of unspoken emotion, delivered the final, life-altering revelation. "And you, my dear Chloe," he said, a single tear tracing a path down his wrinkled cheek, "are the sole beneficiary of it all. It is your birthright. The legacy they tried to steal from you the moment you were born. It's all yours." I broke down, the tears I had been holding back finally streaming down my face. It wasn't just about the money. It was the validation, the love, the profound sense of being seen and cherished by the grandfather I had never known. He hadn't just left me a fortune, he had left me his legacy, his trust, and his final, powerful act of love. My grandfather, ever the meticulous planner, had known that even with his video, the Van Cess would fight. They would hire lawyers, create lies, and try to contest his final wishes. So he had put one final, unbreakable lock on his true legacy, a security measure so personal and so brilliant that only I could ever hope to bypass it. "The private trust," he explained in the video, his voice now a low, instructional whisper, "can only be accessed by you, in person, at a specific bank in Geneva, Switzerland. And it requires a single, verbal password to unlock. No documents, no lawyers, no one can access it but you." He had created an impenetrable vault, its only key a secret that he was about to entrust to me. It was the final piece of his posthumous plan, the checkmate move in his game against his own family's greed. He understood that the password had to be something that couldn't be guessed, researched, or courted out of someone who didn't hold the answer in their heart. It had to be a piece of information unique to my life, a life he had never been a part of. The elegance of his solution was breathtaking. I had my people do some research, my dear, he confessed, a faint, proud smile on his lips. Not on you, but on the family that raised you. And from everything I have learned, they are good people, Chloe. They are decent, honorable people who gave you the love and the life I was too cowardly to fight for. His words were a balm on my soul, a validation of the family that had always been my true north. He wasn't trying to replace them, he was honoring them. Then, he revealed the password. It wasn't a random word or a complex code. It was a name. The password to your future, my dear, is the maiden name of the woman who was a real mother to you, the woman who raised you with a love I could only watch from afar. The password is O'Malley. My mother's maiden name. A name so simple, so personal, so deeply a part of my own identity, yet a name the Vances would never in a million years think to look for. It was a password that was not just a key, but a symbol. It was a bridge between the grandfather I never knew and the parents who were my entire world. It was his final, profound acknowledgement that blood isn't what makes a family, love is. He had entrusted his entire legacy to a testament of the love my adoptive parents had given me. In that moment, the full weight of his love and his trust settled upon me. It was a burden, yes, but it was also the greatest honor of my life. The video ended, leaving my father and me in a stunned, emotional silence. My grandfather hadn't just left me a fortune. He had left me a mission, a strategy, and a profound expression of his love. He had given me a story, a history, and a purpose. He had validated my past, secured my future, and given me the tools to deliver a justice that was almost poetic in its perfection. The Vances thought they were dealing with a naive orphan. They had no idea they were about to be undone by the ghost of their own father, a ghost who loved his granddaughter more than he despised his own children's greed. A week later, just as my grandfather had predicted, the official offer arrived from Mr. Sterling's office. It was delivered by courier, a thick, intimidating document filled with dense legal clauses and impenetrable jargon. It was exactly what Theodore had described, a formal settlement agreement. Accompanying it was a cloying, handwritten note from Eleanor on her personal, monogrammed stationery. Dearest Chloe, it began, I hope this small gift will help you start a wonderful new chapter in your life. We are all so thrilled to finally have you as part of our family, and we look forward to making up for all the lost time. The hypocrisy was so thick it was almost suffocating. The small gift she was referring to, as outlined in the legal document, was a one-time, full and final payment of $50,000. The document was a masterpiece of legal entrapment. In exchange for the $50,000, I would be required to sign away any and all future claims on the Vance estate, including my $2.5 million share of the main trust. It was all there in the fine print, buried under pages of legal boilerplate. They were offering me less than 2% of what I was legally owed, and they were dressing it up as an act of profound generosity. My father and I read the document, not with anger, but with a cold, detached sense of satisfaction. They were performing the script exactly as my grandfather had written it for them. They were so blinded by their own arrogance and so convinced of my naivety that they couldn't see the gaping jaws of the trap they were so eagerly walking into. Following my grandfather's posthumous instructions to the letter, I knew it was time to make my move. I waited a day, to give the impression of careful consideration, and then I called Mr. Sterling's office. I put on the performance of my life, my voice a carefully crafted mixture of gratitude, awe, and a touch of overwhelmed naivety. Mr. Sterling, I began, my voice trembling slightly, I've received the offer. I'm just speechless. $50,000, it's more money than I've ever seen. Please, tell Eleanor and my family that I am so incredibly grateful. I could almost hear the smug satisfaction in his voice as he assured me that the family was delighted to help. He suggested I come to his office the next day to sign the papers privately and quietly. This was the moment. "Oh, no," I said, my voice sweet and innocent. "I couldn't possibly sign something so important in private. This feels like such a momentous occasion, the day I officially become part of the Vance family. I would be honored to sign the papers at the formal will reading you mentioned, with everyone present. I want to be able to thank them all in person for their incredible generosity." There was a brief, almost imperceptible pause on the other end of the line. My request was unusual, but to refuse it would be to admit that they wanted the signing to be a quiet, hidden affair. It would raise suspicion. Tracked by their own narrative of a happy family reunion, they had no choice but to agree. "An excellent idea, Ms. Benson," Sterling finally said. "I will arrange it." The hook was set. The Vances immediately sent me a series of gushing text messages, telling me how much my gesture meant to them. They believed they had won. They had no idea they had just RSVP'd to their own execution. The day of the will reading felt like stepping onto a movie set. The law offices of Sterling, Lynch, and Vance were the physical embodiment of power, a place designed to intimidate. The boardroom was a cavernous space on the top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the New York skyline. A single, massive mahogany table, polished to a mirror shine, dominated the room. The entire Vance clan was already assembled when we arrived, a portrait of dynastic arrogance. Eleanor was the picture of a grieving but powerful matriarch in a tailored black suit, while Marcus and Isabella sat beside her, radiating a smug, predatory confidence. They were so close to their prize they could taste it. They looked at me and my father, David, not as family, but as the final, minor obstacle to be cleared before they could claim their victory. They saw my simple dress and my father's off-the-rack suit and dismissed us, their expressions a mixture of pity and contempt. My father, carrying a simple, worn leather briefcase, took his seat beside me, his presence a quiet, steady anchor in that ocean of hostility. His calm demeanor seemed to unnerve them more than any display of aggression would have. They were expecting a scared, grateful orphan, and instead, they got a woman with a retired private investigator for a father, a man who had spent his life reading the tales of liars and con artists. I could see the flicker of annoyance in their eyes. Our presence was a slight disruption to their perfectly staged event. Mr. Sterling, their lawyer, began the proceedings with a droning, self-important monologue about the legacy of Theodore Vance and the legal formalities of executing his final wishes. He spoke in a condescending tone, occasionally glancing at me as if to make sure the simple girl from the suburbs was keeping up with the complex legal concepts. It was all a performance, a final bit of theater before the curtain fell on their successful scheme. The atmosphere in the room was thick with anticipation as Mr. Sterling arrived at the main event, the $10 million trust. He explained the terms, confirming the four-way split between the grandchildren, just as my grandfather had predicted in his video. He then turned his attention to me, a predatory glint in his eyes. "And now," he said, "we come to the matter of Chloe Benson. Due to the unique circumstances of her discovery, and to expedite the distribution of the estate for all parties, the family has made a most generous offer." He slid the thick stack of settlement papers across the polished table, the documents coming to a stop directly in front of me. The finality of the gesture was palpable. This was it. The culmination of their plan, the moment their greed would be codified into law. I could feel their collective gaze on me, a heavy, expectant pressure. They were leaning forward in their chairs, a pack of wolves waiting for the lamb to walk willingly into the slaughter. Mr. Sterling presented the document with a flourish, summarizing its generous terms for the official record. He confirmed the one-time payment of $50,000 in exchange for the full and final relinquishment of all my claims on the Vance estate. Then, Eleanor played her final, manipulative card. She leaned across the table, her hand covering mine, her touch as cold as ice. Her face was a mask of practiced sincerity. "This is just the beginning, dear," she whispered, her voice a soft, conspiratorial purr. "A new chapter for all of us. This is our way of finally welcoming you into the family." She then slid a heavy, gold-plated fountain pen towards me, a ceremonial instrument for my own execution. It was the peak moment of their perceived victory. Marcus and Isabella exchanged a subtle, triumphant smirk. They believed, with an absolute and arrogant certainty, that they had won. They had no idea that their carefully constructed world was about to be annihilated. I picked up the heavy gold pen, its weight feeling obscene in my hand. The entire room held its breath. I looked down at the signature line, then I looked up, my gaze sweeping across the expectant, greedy faces of my biological family. I let the silence stretch for a moment, savoring the final seconds of their arrogant delusion. Then, I set the pen down. My voice, when I spoke, was not the timid, grateful whisper they were expecting. It was calm, clear, and carried an unshakable authority that made them all flinch. Before I sign anything, I announced to the room, I believe my grandfather, Theodore Vance, left one final message for everyone here. A wave of confusion washed over their faces. Eleanor's perfect smile faltered. Marcus's smirk vanished. They exchanged panicked, questioning glances. They had controlled the narrative so perfectly, and I had just introduced a variable they had never anticipated. Before they could object, before Sterling could interject with a legal protest, my father, David, acted. With a quiet, practiced efficiency, he opened his simple leather briefcase and took out my laptop. He calmly walked to the end of the boardroom, connected the laptop to the massive, wall-mounted monitor, and hit a single key. The screen, which had been displaying the Vance Industries logo, flickered to life. The face of Theodore Vance, frail and weary but with eyes that burned with a righteous fire, filled the screen, his gaze seeming to look directly at his stunned and horrified family. A collective gasp went through the room. The atmosphere of smug confidence instantly evaporated, replaced by a thick, terrified silence. Their perfectly controlled environment had been hijacked. The ghost of the man they thought they had silenced was about to have the final word. The video began, and my grandfather's weak, raspy voice filled the silent boardroom. He started with his apology to me, his words a raw and painful confession of his cowardice. Then, his tone shifted, and he began to dismantle his family's character with a surgical precision. The Vances sat frozen, their faces turning from confusion to a dawning, sickening horror as they realized what was happening. This wasn't a sentimental home movie. It was a posthumous deposition, a final, damning testimony from a man they could no longer silence or control. They were tracked, forced to listen as the patriarch they had pretended to mourn exposed their lifetime of greed and manipulation to their own lawyers, and to the granddaughter they had so foolishly underestimated. The boardroom was no longer their seat of power, it had become their courtroom, and their father was the star witness for the prosecution. Theodore, in the video, continued to lay out their scheme with chilling accuracy, detailing the $10 million trust and predicting the insulting offer they would make me. Then, with a grim satisfaction, he revealed the poison pill clause. He explained that their documented, fraudulent offer, presented to me at this very meeting, had just triggered the forfeiture of their own inheritance. Eleanor let out a strangled, involuntary gasp, her hand flying to her throat. Marcus and Isabella just stared, their faces ashen, their arrogance completely annihilated. Mr. Sterling, their own lawyer, looked as if he'd been struck by lightning, realizing with dawning horror that he had been an unwitting instrument in his client's self-destruction. The trap had been sprung, and they had walked right into it, their own greed the bait and the trigger. Then came the final, devastating blow. My grandfather smiled, a sad, weary smile. But that was just the test, he said, his voice a near whisper. My real fortune, the one you never knew about. He then revealed the existence of the $100 million private trust, a fortune he had hidden away for a single, rightful heir. He looked directly into the camera, his love and regret a palpable force in the room. It's all yours, Chloe. And then, the checkmate move. He revealed the password, the final, unbreakable lock on his legacy. The password is O'Malley, he said. The name meant nothing to them, but to me, it was everything. It was a final, profound tribute to the family that had truly loved me. The video ended. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of Eleanor's choked, disbelieving sob. The aftermath was a swift and brutal demolition. The Van Cess were utterly ruined. The poison pill clause was ironclad, and their combined $7.5 million inheritance was immediately redirected to the scholarship foundation my grandfather had named. Their own lawyer, Mr. Sterling, facing potential disbarment for his firm's role in presenting a fraudulent document, turned on them, providing evidence for the inevitable lawsuits that followed. Their social and financial ruin was total and merciless. They had gambled everything on a sure thing and had lost in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. They had been outmaneuvered, outplanned, and outjudged by the father they had so deeply misunderstood. His final act was not one of generosity, but of perfect, karmic justice. A few months later, my father and I traveled to Geneva. The process at the Swiss bank was exactly as my grandfather had described. I sat in a private, quiet room with a senior bank official. He asked me for the password. I took a deep breath and said it aloud, "O'Malley." The official nodded, typed it into his terminal, and after a moment, he looked up and smiled. "Welcome, Ms. Benson. Your grandfather has been waiting for you." The transfer of the $100 million trust was completed within the hour. My life had been irrevocably transformed, but I knew, with a certainty that ran bone deep, that my values had not. The money wasn't the prize, it was a responsibility, a tool to build a new and better legacy. My first act as the heir to the Vance fortune was to honor the family that had forged me. I paid off my parents' mortgage, bought them their dream retirement home on the Oregon coast, and established a trust that would ensure David and Mary would live the rest of their lives in absolute comfort and security. It was the greatest joy of my life to give back to them a fraction of the love and security they had so freely given me. Their tears of joy were worth more to me than all the money in that Swiss bank. They were, and always would be, my true north, my real family. The Van Cess had taught me what family wasn't, David and Mary had shown me what it was. My final act was to create a new legacy, one that would honor both the grandfather who had believed in me and the parents who had raised me. I established the Lily and Theodore Foundation, a multi-million-dollar nonprofit. The Theodore Wing was dedicated to funding the very scholarship program for underprivileged students that my grandfather had admired, the one that had received the Van Cess forfeited inheritance. The Lily Wing, named for the birth mother I would never know, was dedicated to a cause born from my own story, providing pro bono legal aid to adoptees navigating complex and predatory inheritance disputes. I had used the Vance fortune not for revenge, but for redemption. I had turned a story of greed and betrayal into a legacy of justice, generosity, and hope, a legacy I knew, finally, would have made them both proud.